So this paper was presented in March 2025 online for a conference hosted by JNU University in Delhi on ancient Indian philosophy and knowledge. And my paper is on the importance of the ancient Indian and Buddhist principle of Ahimsa, which means non-violence, and not eating animals in the 21st century. So first of all, Ahimsa is the ancient Indian principle of non-violence towards all living beings, and it literally means non-violence. It's a Sanskrit word. So this ancient Indian principle, Ahimsa, basically applies to all living beings. It is also considered to be one of the cardinal precepts of Indian spiritual traditions like Jainism, Hinduism and Buddhism. And it's inspired by a premise that all living beings have the spark of the divine spiritual energy or Buddha nature, that all beings do not want to suffer and want to stay alive and not be eaten by others. So as I said, there are many Indian spiritual traditions that have a history of not eating animals. And for example, the Jains, they are often considered to be the strictest when it comes to not consuming animal products. They are either lacto-vegetarians or vegans, and they avoid harming any living thing whenever possible, including plants and insects. Now, Hindus as well practice vegetarianism in order to minimize harm to other beings, and in particular, the cow is often illegal even to eat in some states of India, and this is where the term, as we all know, the term sacred cow comes from, is that Indians in particular revere the produce and the life of the cow. Now, this is also backed up in India with the yogic diet, because yogic diets encourage eating foods that are minimally harmful to the body, environment, and other living beings. And so a yogi would generally not be eating any sort of animal meat or flesh or produce, and would be eating very simply, such as, for example, fruits, vegetables, and nuts and pulses and so on. And then we come to Buddhism. Now, as we know, one of the main precepts of Buddhism is to refrain from deliberately killing living beings or encouraging others to kill. So Buddha also listed in the wrong livelihoods, he listed that butchery and hunting, killing animals or killing sentient beings is listed as a wrong livelihood. And monastics are generally forbidden from eating meat. So we'll talk about this now. Now, as I said, the history of Ahimsa in India is very ancient. It first appeared in the Vedas, which is a 4,000-year-old Indian spiritual and philosophical belief system. But more recently, there is the well-known political and spiritual leader Mahatma Gandhi, who promoted the principle of Ahimsa in all spheres of life, including in politics. And it is said, for example, that he promised his mother he would never eat non-vegetarian food. And so when he was in the UK, he joined the London Vegetarian Society and became its secretary. And he actually became a very influential figure, in fact, for the UK in terms of encouraging people not to eat animals there. So here is a lovely photo of Mahatma Gandhi ji at a meeting of the London Vegetarian Society in 1931. And he gave a speech there, which is called The Moral Basis of Vegetarianism, which became a very well-known speech. And you can still read this speech online. Now, turning to the Shakyamuni Buddha, now he gave many teachings on not killing and non-violence, both in the Theravada Hinayana Sutras, in the Mahayana Sutras, and even in the Tantras. So if we first look at what they call like the original Buddhist sutras, let's say, or the Hinayana Sutras, here is a quote from one which says, "Monastics, one possessed of three qualities is put into the lower realms according to his actions." What three? One is himself a taker of life, encourages another to do the same, and approves of that taking life. So then he says, monastics, one possessed of three qualities is put into the higher realms according to his actions. And what are those three? He himself abstains from taking life, encourages another to so abstain, and approves of such abstention. So as you can see from this quote, it's very clear that the Buddha is saying that we shouldn't take life, of course, ourselves, we shouldn't deliberately kill, but also we should not encourage others to kill, and we should also approve when other people do not kill. So there are three things here, and so it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to work out that clearly buying animals, purchasing animals from someone who kills the animals for us to eat would be a breach of the second there, which is, encouraging someone else to kill and take life. in terms of monastics. Now, there is a misperception that the Buddha somehow said that monastics can eat animals, and in many places I visited in India and also in Southeast Asia, you often see a lot of monastics eating meat in restaurants, particularly Tibetan Buddhists. And this is a misunderstanding of what was called the threefold purity rule. So this rule arose when the Buddha himself was offered meat at a meal offered by a sponsor to him and his community. And normally the monastics were supposed to take anything that they had been offered. And so the Buddha asked the sponsor if the animal had died naturally, and the sponsor said yes, and then the Buddha permitted everyone to eat it if they so wished. Now, this rule has been misinterpreted, and here is a quote about that. So a person says to the Buddha, Bhagavan, I've heard this. They slaughter living creatures, especially for the ascetic Gautama. The ascetic Gautama knowingly eats meat prepared on his behalf. This is a deed he caused. And so the Buddha replies, Jivaka, those who say this do not repeat what I have said. They misrepresent me with what is false and untrue. In 3 cases, I say that meat may not be eaten. If it's seen, heard, or suspected, it was killed on purpose to eat. And in 3 cases, I say that meat may be eaten. If it's not seen, heard, or suspected, it was killed on purpose to eat. So these are 3 cases in which meat may be eaten. So again, I think it's quite clear from that the Buddha was clearly saying that really we should not be eating any meat, particularly monastics, unless it's offered to them. And they are absolutely 100% sure that the meat was not specifically killed to eat. So now we can look at other quotes from the Buddha's sutras, which talk about the wrong livelihood of killing animals or sentient beings, and butchery as well. So he listed these as one of the wrong livelihoods, and here's a quote. It says, monks or lay followers should not engage in 5 types of business or livelihood. Which 5? Business in weapons, business in human beings, business in meat, business in intoxicants, and business in poison. Now, these are the 5 types of business that a lay follower should not engage in. So again, it's quite clear here, and again, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to work out that that means also if we buy meat from lay people who kill meat, whether we're monastics or lay people, we are breaching this rule, we are supporting a wrong livelihood, we are supporting others taking life, and so on. Now, if we move on to the Mahayana path and the Mahayana sutras, and not everyone in Buddhism accepts these are the words of the Buddha, but nonetheless there are millions of people who do. And one of the most famous is the Lankavatara Sutra, which the Buddha was said to have taught on the island of Sri Lanka. And chapter 8 in particular lists many, many reasons which the Buddha taught why people on the Mahayana path who are bodhisattvas in training should absolutely abandon eating animals, slaughtered animals. And here is a quote. He says, it's not true, Mahamati, that meat is proper food and permissible for the Shravaka when the animal was not killed by himself, when he did not order others to kill it, and when it was not specially meant for him. So here the Buddha is actually starting to challenge even this threefold rule. He's saying that even in that situation, even when he didn't even order others to kill it, for example, it's still not allowed to consume animal flesh which has been slaughtered. So here's some more quotes from the Lankavatara Sutra. He says, to those who eat meat, there are detrimental effects. To those who do not, merits. Mahamati, you should know that meat eaters bring detrimental effects upon themselves. So here the Buddha is specifically stating of the negative karma that comes with eating animals. And for example, he gives many, many other reasons about that. And obviously, it's also said that, you know, people who eat animal flesh, they're more likely to be reborn as animals that kill other animals. They are more likely to be reborn as animals that are killed to eat, and so on. Now, the next quote is, he says, let the practitioner yogi refrain from eating flesh as it is born of himself, as the eating involves transgression, as flesh is produced of semen and blood, and as the killing of animals causes terror to living beings. So again, this is another reason the Buddha gives, and the Buddha even talks about, you know, how when you eat a lot of meat, you know, you smell of this meat and other animals can smell it and they feel fearful of you, and also the negative effect on the health, on the mind, and you know, you're kind of consuming this blood and semen of another sentient being, and that this is not very good for you psychologically or even physically. And then another quote here is, you know, he says, for profit, sentient beings are destroyed. For flesh, money is paid out. They are both evildoers, and the deed matures in the hells. So again, this is a very strong statement. He's saying, you know, there is nothing good about this. There's nothing good about eating it. There's nothing good about those who do business in it. and the end result is extremely negative karma. So again, we should refrain from eating it. And there are other Mahayana sutras that say similar things. For example, in the Mahayana Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which is understood to be the final and definitive Mahayana teaching of the Buddha given on the evening of his passing away, the Buddha teaches that the eating of meat extinguishes the seed of great compassion, and that all consumption of animals, even those found already dead, so those that have naturally died, is prohibited. And he specifically rejects the idea that even when monks are begging for alms and receiving meat from a donor, that they should eat that as permissible. Now, if we move to Vajrayana Buddhism in Tibet and what was said in the Tantras, let's say, well, there is again this very common misperception that somehow it was permitted in tantric practice, and that Tibetan Buddhists and Himalayan Buddhists who practice Vajrayana were allowed to eat meat. Again, this is a misperception. And some people think that because it's very high altitude, they were unable to sustain a vegetarian diet or a plant-based diet. Well, again, the writing suggests otherwise. So as Jeffrey Barstow, who wrote the book The Faults of Meat, Tibetan Buddhist Vegetarian Writing, says vegetarian was not only present in pre-communist Tibet, it was in fact a significant aspect of Tibetan religious practice. Furthermore, these vegetarian lamas came from all the major Buddhist lineages in Tibet, from all regions and from all time periods. Some were relatively minor figures, but others were among the most important masters of their day and remain well known centuries later. So, for example, there are great masters such as Dolpapa, the 8th Karmapa, 7th Karmapa, many great men, and J. Milarepa, the Tibetan yogi, Drupa Kunle, many examples of great yogis who practiced Vajrayana and were strict vegetarians and really abandoned eating any sort of animal produce, and particularly slaughtered animals. Now, if we move on to a different subject now, which is connected to the principle of Ahimsa, not necessarily to Buddhism itself, we can look at how its effect on human beings more as well. So many studies have shown that, similar to the post-traumatic stress disorders of soldiers involved in military combat, people who work in slaughterhouses often suffer serious depression and psychological trauma due to witnessing and participating in murdering sentient beings on a daily basis. And there are also studies that say meat eaters also show greater levels of aggression. So we can see from this that, even if we can't find enough compassion for the animals, the people who have to work in these industries, who have to kill animals every day, tend to become very psychologically disturbed or very sadistic or psychopathic. And also there's been studies to show that when groups of animals have been given meat and another group has been given vegetarian diet, they show greater levels of aggression in the meat-eating group. And so they're saying that this is a reason for conflict, that it also produces greater aggression in human beings as well. So then finally, we'll look at another major 21st century problem, which is the not harming the environment and natural resources. And again, the application of the principle of Ahimsa is crucial for this. So the Shakyamuni Buddha and Tibetan Buddhist masters taught against eating meat prior to technological inventions that allowed mass breeding and slaughter of millions and millions of animals for food every year. Now, today, with this sort of advances, let's say, in technology, it is well documented now that such practices cause massive catastrophic harm to the environment, to the air we breathe, to climate change, wasting of natural resources, of land, water, extinction of other species, and all of that. And also, they say, for example, the pollution of the environment, where there are these mass slaughterhouses, pollution of rivers with the blood and all the excess waste from these slaughterhouses and the bones and so on, causes a huge amount of destruction and damage. And so again, this is another major reason why it is advised that the principle of Ahimsa, the ancient Indian principle of Ahimsa, is so essential in the 21st century. And this is changing because also there are these foreign influences in India. But nonetheless, I think it is a very important principle that we can all learn from. So that's just a very brief introduction to the whole topic of vegetarianism and Buddhism and Indian principle of Ahimsa. But for those of you who would like to know more, there are a few research articles I've published on my website, dakinitranslations.com. Thank you.